On a warm summer evening in 1948, two people sat on an Australian beach and watched a man die. Neither of them knew it. They thought he was drunk, sleeping it off against the sea wall in his good suit. They joked about it and looked back at the sunset. At about 7 o'clock, one of them saw his right arm rise into the air and drop limply into the sand. It never moved again. A young couple settled nearby and stayed half an hour. The mosquitoes were vicious that night. He never flinched once. They noticed. They stayed anyway. And on the steps above the beach, another witness saw something stranger. A well-dressed man, standing still, looking down at the body below. At 6:30 the next morning, December 1st, early swimmers found him. Same spot, same pose. Head against the sea wall, legs extended, feet neatly crossed. He was dressed for dinner. Pressed white shirt, a red, white and blue tie, polished shoes, a heavy double-breasted jacket. On a beach, in an Australian summer heatwave. A half-smoked cigarette rested on his collar, as if it had simply fallen from his lips mid-breath. The police emptied his pockets. A used bus ticket, an unused train ticket, chewing gum, cigarettes, matches. No wallet, no identification. And in 1948, no hat. Nobody respectable left home without a hat. They expected to name him within days. It took 73 years. And when the answer finally came, it made the mystery worse. This is the Somerton Man. Chapter 2. The man who wasn't there. The autopsy landed on pathologist John Dwyer's table. His conclusion was blunt. Quote, "I am quite convinced the death could not have been natural. Inside, every organ screamed poison. Congested brain vessels, a stomach holding blood-mixed food, congested kidneys, an engorged liver, and a spleen swollen to 3 times its normal size. And yet, no poison was ever found. Not in the blood, not in the stomach. Not a single trace. Whatever killed him left the building before the coroner arrived. Behind closed doors, experts suggested 2 candidates: digitalis or Ouabain, a rare cardiac poison that breaks down after death and disappears. That suspicion was kept from the public until the 1980s. His last meal was ordinary, a pasty 3 to 4 hours before he died. Death came at around 2 in the morning, hours after the witnesses watched that arm fall. Which raises a cold question. What exactly did they watch? The body itself refused to explain. Mid-40s, 6 feet tall, athletic shoulders. Hands soft as a clerk's, no labour, no calluses. But calf muscles like a dancer's, and toes pressed into a strange wedge shape, like a man who lived in tight boots. Then an officer turned out his collar to check the maker's label. And the case changed forever. The label was gone. Cut out. Jacket, shirt, trousers. Every identifying tag on the man's body had been deliberately removed. Understand what that means. Someone, maybe the man himself, maybe someone else, had sat down with scissors and carefully unmade him before he ever walked onto that beach, except they missed 3. A T-marked T Keen, a laundry bag marked Keen, a singlet marked K-E-A-N. Finally, a name. Police searched Australia, then the English-speaking world. No T Keen was missing, anywhere. Either the tags were left on purpose, because they were someone else's name, or the dead man was wearing another man's clothes. One more wrinkle. The jacket's tailoring was American, machine work you couldn't get in Australia. Yet there was no record he'd ever arrived in the country at all. His fingerprints went to every Allied country on Earth. Scotland Yard, the FBI. Nothing. In a century obsessed with paperwork, this man had none. Adelaide did something rare. They embalmed the body to keep it and cast his face in plaster. A death mask. Remember that mask. 73 years later, it ends this story. Chapter 3. The Suitcase. 6 weeks in, the case was freezing. Then, detectives thought about luggage. At Adelaide railway station, in the cloakroom, sat an unclaimed brown suitcase. Checked in on November 30th, the last morning of his life. Inside was a life, with a name cut out of it. A red checked dressing gown, red felt slippers, pyjamas, a shaving kit. And once again, every label removed. One detail few people notice. A spare pair of trousers, in that case, had sand in the cuffs. Beach sand. He had been to the coast before that final day. Then the tools. An electrician's screwdriver. A table knife, ground down into a blade. Scissors, sharpened to points. And a stenciling brush, the kind used to mark cargo on merchant ships. A sailor's kit? A smuggler's? Or something else entirely. 1948. The Cold War is 1 year old, and Adelaide sits next door to one of the West's most secret weapons ranges. And one thread, literally, tied the case to the corpse. Barber brand orange waxed thread. Unusual. British. The same rare thread had been used to repair the trouser pocket he died in. The suitcase was his, beyond doubt. But the strangest thing about that suitcase was what wasn't there. No spare socks, and no correspondence, not a letter, not a note, not one written word, except a name that led nowhere. Decades later, in 1986, the authorities destroyed that suitcase and everything in it. The official reason? No longer required. Modern forensics never got to touch it. So, by mid-1949, they had a body no one missed, a suitcase that answered nothing, and a name that didn't exist. The inquest opened, and the case was about to produce its most famous clue. Chapter 4. Tamám Shud. It is finished. Re-examining the clothes, an expert found a tiny fob pocket sewn inside the trouser waistband. Easy to miss. Everyone had. Inside was a rolled scrap of paper the size of a postage stamp. Printed on it in elegant type, 2 words: Tamám Shud. Persian. It means it is ended. It is finished. The words are the final line of a book, the Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyám. 11th century Persian poetry about living fully, because death comes for everyone. The scrap had been torn from the last page of a real copy. Somewhere, that book was missing its ending. Police went public. Find us this exact book, with the last page torn. And a man walked into the station holding one. He'd found it, he said, tossed through the open window of his car, parked on Jetty Road, Glenelg, right around the time the Somerton Man was last seen alive. The torn page matched, fibre for fibre. Then detectives tilted the back cover under lamplight. Pressed into the card, indentations of handwriting that had been torn away. 5 lines of capital letters. WRGOABABD. 50-odd letters. 1 line struck through. It looks like nonsense. It has never, ever been read. Australian Naval Intelligence tried. Then generations of code breakers. Then modern computers crunching it against whole libraries. The best guess, after 70 years, the letters are initials, the first letters of words. A private shorthand, unbreakable, because only one mind ever held the key. But under that code was something police could use. A telephone number, penciled, unlisted. It belonged to a house on Mosley Street, Glenelg, 400 metres from where he died. Let that settle. A man erased from existence dies on a beach. A 5-minute walk from the phone number hidden in the book, connected to the poetry scrap sewn into his own waistband. Who answers that phone? Chapter 5. The nurse. The number belonged to a 27-year-old nurse. Jessica Thompson. Police protected her identity for half a century. The files just called her Jestin. Her first answer was misdirection. She said she'd once owned a Rubáiyát, but she'd given it to a soldier in Sydney in 1945. A lieutenant named Alf Boxall. Perhaps, she implied, the dead man was him, except Alf Boxall was alive. Working at a Sydney bus depot, and when police visited, he produced his copy of the Rubáiyát, intact. Last page still there. Her story had just collapsed. So Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean tried something harder. He brought her to the plaster cast. The dead man's actual face. And watched her. Jessica Thompson looked at that face and nearly collapsed. Officers described her as completely taken aback. about to faint. She looked at the floor, and she would not look at the face again. Then she composed herself and said she didn't know him. Leanne didn't believe her. Nobody who has read that file believes her. But 1940s detectives didn't push respectable married mothers. They let it go. One more thing. She asked police to keep her name out of the permanent records for her reputation. They agreed. The woman connected to the erased man got herself erased from his file. Now the detail that hums under this whole case. Jessica had a 16-month-old son, Robin. Years later, researchers studied photographs of Robin and found two rare anatomical traits: an unusual ear structure and missing lateral incisor teeth. The Somerton Man had both. The odds of two unrelated people sharing both traits have been put between 1 in 10 million and 1 in 20 million. Robin grew up to be a ballet dancer. Remember the dead man's calves. Jessica died in 2007, telling nothing. 6 years later, her daughter Kate went on national television and said it plainly. My mother lied to police. She knew who the Somerton Man was. And then Kate added the sentence that set the internet on fire. Her mother spoke Russian and would never say where she learned it. A nurse in Cold War Adelaide, next to a secret rocket range. Draw your own map. By now you have two stories fighting in your head. A poisoned agent erased by a handler, or a discarded man who came to see a woman and a son he couldn't have. For 70 years, you couldn't rule out either. Chapter 6. The Other Body. Because here is what most tellings of this story leave out. A man dying with the Rubáiyát had happened before. Sydney, June 3rd, 1945. 3.5 years before Somerton. In Ashton Park, on a rock ledge overlooking the harbour, a body. Joseph George Marshall, a businessman from Singapore. Poisoned. The inquest called it suicide by barbiturate, and lying open on his chest, a copy of the Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyám. The same book. The same poem about accepting death, placed like a statement. Decades later, researchers checked Marshall's copy against the publisher's records. Methuen printed 5 editions. Marshall's book claimed to be a 7th, an edition that does not exist, a phantom edition. Like a prop manufactured for a scene, or, as some researchers whisper, like a signal, a book used for something other than reading. Now the geography. Ashton Park sits directly beside the Clifton Gardens Hotel, the exact place where, just 2 months after Marshall's death, a young nurse handed a soldier an inscribed Rubáiyát. Jessica Thompson. Justin. 2 months, a few hundred meters, the same strange book. 2 poisoned men, 3 years apart, and her shadow falls across both. One more twist of history. Marshall's brother David went on to become the first Chief Minister of Singapore. This was not an anonymous family, and still, no one ever connected the dots in public. Maybe it is all coincidence. But coincidence has a shape, and two Rubáiyát bodies in one woman's orbit is not that shape. Chapter 7. The Cold War Angle. To understand why half the world thinks this man was a spy, you have to stand in 1948. The Berlin blockade, the Iron Curtain. The year the world chose sides, and Adelaide was not a sleepy beach town. A few hundred kilometres north sat Woomera, the largest overland rocket test range in the Western world. Britain's most secret weapons programme. Crawling with scientists and watchers. That same year, American codebreakers reading Soviet cables, the VENONA program, confirmed something ugly. There were Soviet sources inside the Australian government. Washington briefly cut Australia off from classified intelligence entirely. Into that Adelaide walks a man with every label cut from his clothes. Fingerprints no allied nation can match. American tailoring, a stencil brush for marking ships, and a book code in his luggage. You can see why the spy theory refuses to die. Add the poison. Ouabain, the cardiac glycoside experts privately suspected, kills fast and vanishes from the body. Exactly the kind of chemistry intelligence services prized for quiet removals. Add the nurse. 400 meters from the body, her number in his book. A woman her own daughter says spoke Russian and never explained where she learned it. In the spy reading of this story, the Rubáiyát is a signal book. The letters are a message log. The beach is a meeting that went wrong. And the well-dressed man on the steps wasn't just admiring the sunset. It's seductive. But be honest about the holes. Real intelligence officers carry flawless cover documents, not nothing. And erasing every label only guarantees the one thing a spy can't afford: attention. So hold both stories in your hands. The agent, silenced by a chemist's poison. The broken man, dying in his best clothes within sight of a life he couldn't have. For 73 years, the evidence refused to choose. Then came the professor and a shovel. Chapter 8. The Answer. Enter Derek Abbott, a university professor in Adelaide who spent 15 years refusing to let this case die. He petitioned, he researched, he even married into the mystery. His wife is Robin's daughter, Jessica Thompson's granddaughter. In May 2021, the state finally said yes. They exhumed the Somerton Man. 72 years in the ground. The remains came up, deeper than expected, but usable. Yet the breakthrough didn't come from the grave. It came from the plaster death mask made in 1949. When they cast his face, strands of his hair set into the plaster. The mask had been holding his DNA for 70 years. Abbott and American genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick pulled DNA from a single rootless hair and started building family trees. 4,000 names. Branch by branch, closing in on one empty space. On July 26, 2022, they announced a name. The Somerton Man, the researchers concluded, was Carl Webb. Born November 16, 1905, Footscray, Melbourne. An electrical instrument maker. Australian all along. Not an American, not a sailor, not a ghost. And not T. Keane, Webb's brother-in-law, was named John Keane. The unremovable labels were borrowed clothes from family. Then researchers opened Carl Webb's life and went quiet. His wife's divorce papers describe a solitary, moody, violent man who wrote poetry. Most of it about death, which he once called his greatest desire. In 1946, he had survived an overdose. In late 1946, his wife Dorothy fled the marriage. In 1947, Carl Webb simply vanished from every record. 18 months later, a man washed up dead on Somerton Beach, and here is the quiet thud of an answer. Dorothy had moved to Butte, South Australia, 144 kilometres from Adelaide. Abbott's theory, Webb came to find her. The divorce papers she later filed listed him as whereabouts unknown. Even the unbreakable code deflates in this light. Webb liked betting on horses. Those 5 lines of initials may be nothing more than a gambler's shorthand. Names of horses. 70 years of cryptographers, possibly defeated by a betting slip. So it's over. Tamám Shud. It is finished. Except it isn't. Because the DNA answered one question. Who? It never answered how. And it never answered why. Why was Jessica Thompson's unlisted phone number in Carl Webb's book? No connection between them has ever been found. Why did she nearly faint at his face and lie for 60 years? Why does a man dying by his own choice cut the labels from his clothes, hide the goodbye in a secret pocket, and carry no name? Grief explains the death. It does not explain the erasure. And the poison that left no trace was never identified. The pathologist who swore the death wasn't natural was never answered. The witnesses who watched that arm fall at 7 when death came at 2 were never explained. To this day, South Australian police have not formally confirmed the identification. Officially, the man under the headstone marked the unknown man is still unknown. Robin, the boy with the dead man's ears, died in 2009, never knowing the question even existed. Jessica took whatever she knew to her grave, and the beach at Somerton keeps the rest. Somewhere, perhaps, in a drawer that hasn't been opened since the 40s, sit Carl Webb's poems about death. If they exist, They are the only confession this case will ever have. Someone owns that drawer. Maybe someone watching this.
Tamám Shud. It is finished. The most honest lie ever printed. This was the Somerton Man, and if this story held you, the next case is already on the desk. Good night.